I'm Flavia Lopes. I'm here at the Nairobi negotiating session of the Convention of Biological Diversity. It's the fourth and final session that will help finalize the post-2020 biodiversity framework that seeks to halt species loss for the next 10 years. Finance has been one of the main holdups of the session. I interviewed Dr. Vinod Mathur, who is India's official delegation to UNCBD here at Nairobi. He tells us why finance is important for India and what are the main hurdles in achieving that. So first question, why is finance for biodiversity conservation important for developing countries, especially India?
See, I will answer this in a very simple manner. I will first say that what is that you can do without finance? In your personal life, in your professional life, in running a school, college, hospital, everywhere you need finance. So it's not only that finance is needed, without that nothing can actually happen. Now this is my first part of my response. Although I will also say in the same breath that by having finance is not a guarantee that you will be able to do everything. So definitely you need money. You need money to first of all develop capacity. Because for any action that you will take, any program that you would like to run, you need to have sources of funding. You can create that, you can get technical help, but somebody has to pay. See, in science and ecology, we say there is no free lunch. So some investments are needed, some funds are needed, and that is where we are now saying that biodiversity conservation, which is important not just for India but for this entire planet. So it's not that India is making any special request for that. After all, we are trying to conserve the global biodiversity, and if we do that, I would say all countries, especially the countries of the global south, they need funding support in order to secure and strengthen their biodiversity.
What have been the biggest hurdles in getting the finance that developing countries need to implement this framework?
See, the biggest hurdle is the ability to get that money. I just said that we need money, but getting money is not easy. Nobody has or wants to give or share that money. You need to have proper perspective, you need to have a proper project, and then somebody should become interested, and we should be able to communicate to everybody that what are we going to do with those funds. See, every donor, and as they say sometimes in financial language, getting the first dollar is the most difficult thing. Because people would like to know who you are, why you want, what you will do, will it be for a good use or it will be wasted. So the question then is that our requirements, first of all, we must know what we need. So that is where I must share with you that every country needs to prepare what is called as a biodiversity finance plan. So do we as a country, I first speak of India, do we know how much money that we need? And fortunately, in recent times, we have been part of a project called Biodiversity Finance Initiative, or BioFin. So that's a global project. About 35 countries in the world are part of that. UNDP is leading that project. India is a part of that. And for the last 5 to 6 years, I've been part of that project with officials in the ministry, in UNDP, and National Biodiversity Authority, in Wildlife Institute of India. And we have tried to find out what is the amount of investments that we need. So that is the first part. Second part is, how much do you need? Okay, so as one would do it, I'll give you a very simple example. As you do it in a home budget, you must know what you need. You must then know what you have. Then comes the question, what is the gap? So see, this is the biggest challenge to the entire global community, that this kind of financial planning, this kind of preparation of national biodiversity financial plans have not been done. As I said, we have also done recently. It is at a work in progress, but still we are getting an idea that what a country like India would need to conserve or secure its biodiversity.
So you said that India has a biodiversity finance plan. So what are the numbers that you have
Good
come up?
question. So see, we as I said, there is a methodology, there is a process. We did that, and what it says that we need something like 16.5 billion US dollars, and what we have from all sources is 10. So there is a gap
Per
of
year?
6.5 billion US dollar. So I'm not saying that this is final and this is very precise, but it gives you an idea that our needs are more and our resource availability is less, and therefore we need to look at what is now being called as resource mobilization. And I want to again stress to you why we are using this word mobilization. So the word mobilization itself has a different meaning. Many times people say that when they need money, others imagine that somebody will print money and somebody will give it to you. See, that kind of a thing is not going to happen, and especially for conservation. So what we need to look at that for conserving biodiversity, who can play an important role. And I will give you one example and tell you how mobilization can work. Now we know that agriculture and biodiversity are very strongly linked. Whatever happens in agriculture has an impact on forest, and whatever happens in forest can also have impact over there. Now we know that organic farming is important, because if you are using organic farming, you are using less of fertilizers, you are not affecting the soil fertility, soil health, and so on and so forth. So if imagine in a district organic farming is being done, it is helping the environment, helping forest, helping productivity. So under this biofin project, we then went to agriculture ministry and said that do you have a program on organic farming? We had of course done our homework. We knew that they had. So they said yes, they have, but they operate in X number of state and in Y number of districts. So now what is my goal? I want this organic farming to be practiced in very large number of districts in the country. Now this is where I want to explain what mobilization means. So I am not saying that environment ministry needs to be given the fund from somewhere else to do that. It is the same agriculture ministry. We then ask this question that can you are doing it for 6 states on a pilot basis, can you do it in 10? And that person said, the person who was responsible for that scheme, he said yes, it is possible. I said how many districts you cover? He said 16. Can you do it 25? So now you see the same ministry, the same program, same things. Now they are agreeing that they can upscale their project. So now you see the mobilization means nothing else. Nobody is exchanging hands or money. But in the same program, he has been able to do it. And then because we explained that an organic farming scheme is much more important, then what they can do in government, they can reallocate resources. So if there is one which was being spent for something else, now the government feels that organic farming is a better scheme, it will reach out to people, it will help the environment, it will provide livelihoods. So that is how the concept of mobilization is going to work as we go along.
Do you feel if the negotiating session delivered what developing countries expected on finance?
See, it's too early for me. We are halfway into negotiations only. We are trying our best to convince. So there is a polarization. Countries in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, the developing South needs more fund. We are articulating. These figures also are not very precisely known, that whether we need 100 billion or we need 300 billion and so on and so forth. So there are talks going on over there. The point that we are trying to tell everyone that we are here to frame a global biodiversity framework. Everybody is saying it should be ambitious. We are also saying it should be ambitious. But an ambitious GBF should also be backed up by an ambitious and adequate resourcing. And that is where, I shouldn't say conflict, but that is where difference of opinion is. That while everybody wants the GBF to be as ambitious as possible, not many are willing to provide funds. And when I say not many willing to provide funds, I have more riders to that. Yes, we need funds, but we need adequate amount of funds. That is the first word. Adequate, if I need $10, if you give me one, you say I have given you funds, but that is not adequate. That's one. Second thing is you need to give me in a timely manner. When the world is saying that loss of biodiversity has to be contained, it has to be contained now, today, as we speak. So even for that $1 or $10, if you give me after 3 years, what am I going to do? Or what is biodiversity going to benefit? So there is an issue of adequacy, there is an issue of timeliness, there is also an issue of flexibility. See, many times as a resource manager, you will realize that you have anticipated 5 things for which you need money. Somebody gives you 5. But then you realize that there are 3 more things which are dependent on that. But the funding agency then says, no. Our funds are only to be spent on this. So I'm talking in a very practical manner, having experience of running on ground, that you also have to introduce an element of flexibility. I'm not saying you don't monitor, you don't do surveillance, you do everything, but you also provide the flexibility. And then we also need to look at innovative solutions. See, this is where the finance guy and the conservation guy have to come to each other. It is not that it is just a simple exchange of funds that is going to help conservation. You need to look at all these issues, and therefore some things are better done if some innovations and practices are also there. So that is the fourth thing I want to clarify and qualify, that is linked to resource mobilization.
The co-chair of the CBD Nairobi Working Group negotiation, Francis Ogwal, while addressing the press, said that there should be a landscape approach to finance, which means that finance for biodiversity conservation should come along with finance for climate change adaptation and finance to combat desertification, the 3 pillars of Rio Convention. How effective can this mechanism be? And if, according to you, finance for climate change is focused over finance for biodiversity conservation?
See, again, a very important point is being made. Let me explain you like that. That what is, first of all, reverse of a landscape approach? You did say that our co-chair, Francis, said that we must have a landscape approach. Now, to explain landscape approach, I should first explain what is not a landscape approach. So what is not as a landscape approach is to operate in silos. I do my work, I don't look here, I don't look there, I don't talk, I don't do any convergence. Now, see what is the scientific evidence telling us. We need to look at 3 things. One is biodiversity, one is land, and one is climate. What the world is generally doing, that they are looking at 3 things in 3 different ways. But what is required is a convergence. And that is what Francis is saying, that you cannot just look at climate funds and say, I will solve the climate crisis, I am not concerned with biodiversity. So effectiveness change on ground will happen when the land degradation people, the climate people, and the biodiversity people are talking to each other. Because we need projects which touch all 3. Can you imagine that you can solve the climate crisis without investing in conservation? So this is a very important point which is being made, that yes, we need funds, we need better coordination, we need better this thing, and sometimes the projects have to be jointly operated. So that is what is meant, and that's what I also say, that we cannot continue to have a silo approach. We need to talk to each other, we need to bring in convergence, we need to understand each other. Then only what is called as a transformative change on the ground can happen. If you only look at climate, if you only look at biodiversity, if you only look at land degradation, things are not going to work.
What are the different sources of finance that we are looking for?
This is also very interesting. See, broadly, there are two ways in which one can get finance. I must also admit that I am not a finance person, but I have a basic understanding from what could be the sources as you are asking. So the most important source is the public finance. Governments are responsible, and especially in our part of the world, the developing world, the governments have to play a very important role. And they do play. So the most important source of fund or entity which has a resource or a kitty is the government. So that's the public part. And every time everybody looks at the government, that government should be able to mobilize and provide funds. Yes, I do understand that that is a requirement, but then there is another fund, is the private funds, where we are talking of industry, where we are talking of businesses, big, small, medium, everyone, they too also have funds. And if you recall, India has done a very, very important job by enacting what is called as a Corporate Social Responsibility Act, under which businesses are supposed to provide or share some portion of their funds on an annual basis for projects which have a dimension on social side, economic side, ecology side, and so on and so forth. So we need to tap those private finances also. And the third part, which I must say with a little distress, is the philanthropic organization. Somehow the concept of philanthropy has not deepened so much in India. Although there are people who engage in that, but that is also could be a very important source of that. So when we are talking of conservation, we need a pooling of that resources. Wherever government can chip in, government should. Wherever private finance can be mobilized, we should. And if there are philanthropic organizations which can also help. So the total of that. And then of course we sometimes say of donors, the bilateral donors and multilateral donors and funders of those kinds also are important. So this is what is basically a mix of or a combo of funding that is required for strengthening and securing conservation.
In May 2022, the UN Global Environment Facility announced that it will grant new funding totaling $43 million to developing countries to enable them to implement projects that reverse species loss. In India, are we looking for funds under GEF? If so, what are the challenges of partnering with GEF on finance?
See, certainly, India has a very long-standing relationship with the GEF. And I must also share with you that we take funds from GEF, we also contribute funds to the GEF. It's not that it's a one-way over there. And in many of our sectors, we are unlocking the GEF funds. What is important for this discussion today is that GEF is also realizing that their funding strategy has to change. They fund in 3, 4, 5 different areas, of which biodiversity happens to be one. So all countries, one can tap GEF funds for biodiversity purposes. It is also true that historically GEF funds have been accessed for our protected area projects. India itself had the India Eco Development Project and FREE project and this project and that project. So yes, we have largely, but the GEF is also understanding that biodiversity needs to be conserved elsewhere too. So now if you ask me, what is the exact thing which countries are asking, including India? That all countries have their what is called as the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, or NBSAP. We also have it in India. All or nearly all countries have it. Now these plans were made when there was no GBF. So now GBF is coming. We are already in the month of now June 2022, and as you know, the second part of the COP has been announced in December in Montreal. So we hope that towards the end of this year, we will have the global biodiversity framework. Now, the framework at a global level says something, but our national plans are not aligned. And this is not only just for India, all countries, because GBF was not there. So everybody approached Jeff. When they had consultations, they were told that the first action that would be required for GBF implementation will be what are called as early action grants. And that is what the figure you were mentioning, that Jeff has said that yes, these figures would be, this amount will be available and all countries need to take the first step. And that is where I also was in the Jeff session participating during lunch. I also asked the same question, that how early these funds would be there. And I got an answer that as early as August 22, in a few months from now, countries can access these funds and start aligning their national plans with the GBF.
How do India intend to use biodiversity finance? For instance, many protected areas in India have come up by evicting the local communities that have been conserving forests. So does India plan to keep up with the same kind of conservation?
See, you have asked an interesting question. It needs some bit of explanation. India's model for conservation, I would say, has been historically inclusive model. People might argue that you did displacement and you removed people, so on. Yes, in certain points of history, at certain point of time, we did that. Our law says that there shall be no human settlement inside the national park. And as a part of that, we practiced it. Yes, people were displaced, people were put to an inconvenience and so on. So now I want to take your attention to a different thing. For conservation purposes, we are also talking to a new model. And that model calls for establishment of what are called as OECMs, other effective area-based conservation measures. So let me explain to you. On one side, you have entities like national park, like sanctuaries, community conservation reserve, and at the extreme end is the new OECMs. So while the national parks are geared to protect, conserve, manage wildlife species and so on, and there can be very little human use inside the national park, the other end of the spectrum where we now want to move is the OECM. So OECMs are trying to define conservation in a different way, where no relocation of people is required. Participation of people is very, very important in these OECMs. And that is where we are looking at. And I will very pleased to say that India is taking a good amount of leadership in defining the OECMs. The world itself, these terms have come in the last 3, 4, 5 years. Not enough guidance is there, not enough information is there that what areas can qualify to be OECMs. And I must also share with you with pride that India has joined what is called as the 30 by 30 initiative. What this initiative means, that 30% of our land, 30% of our sea, by the year 2030 will be put under conservation. And that is what India is planning now to do. We have about 22% of our geographic area already under conservation, but we need to move to 30%, and that is where our OECMs are going to play a role. We now don't want to expand the national park systems. They are already at, if I can say so, at a little saturation level. There is little interest, there are a lot of pressures of increasing the area, but OECMs are the route for that. So when we get funding, when we are looking for funds, we also want people who would take part in giving their common lands or village lands and designating them as OECMs should be incentivized. So our first call is that once we start accessing Jeff funds and UNDP or UNEP or wherever funds, we will see to it that those who are contributing towards allowing their land area to be part of OECMs with very little restriction and no displacement, that is what we want to incentivize.
Finally, what kind of progress do you expect to see at the COP15 of UN Convention on Biological Diversity that will take place in Montreal?
See, the first thing is there has been a gap in the hosting of COP. You remember this COP was supposed to take place in 2020, and from 2020 we have moved up to whole of 21, to whole of half of 22, and as you just said, we need to wait till December. So what the world wants, that we cannot afford to delay further actions for biodiversity conservation. And what is one big action? The one big action is the GBF. And that's where everybody, including me, are actively looking at. That all these negotiations are fine, but ultimately they need to conclude. We need to have an approved, endorsed GBF by all countries. Maybe it is end of 2022, so in early 23, we start aligning our MBSAPs, we start implementing them. So that is, if I can say so, my big dream too, that get the GBF approved, endorsed, and start the implementation, look at the monitoring framework, and try to reduce or remove or avoid all those mistakes in the past. See, in 2010, we gave ourselves and told to the world that we have these 20 Aichi targets. And when 2020 came, we said that no, accepting target 11, target 15, others have not been achieved. So we should not do the same mistake, that we have this GBF in place, we have these 4 goals, and we have these 20 targets. They can be 21 or 22 or 25, whatever, 25 also if you can take. But we should not make any mistake in their effective implementation.